The silence at Greystone, murder, oil, and the ledger that vanished. First prologue, Beverly Hills, 1929. Beverly Hills at the end of the Roaring Twenties was a paradox, a sleepy 1.9 square mile municipality trying to look like the English countryside while vibrating with movie lot glamour and oil money. Incorporated only in 1914, the city had just persuaded Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford to build Pickfair in 1919, turning the rolling chaparral into prestige real estate. By 1928, its population, barely 17,000, included more millionaires per acre than anywhere west of the Hudson. None was richer than Edward L. Papa Doheny, the Irish-American prospector who struck the first gusher in Los Angeles in 1892 and whose Pan-American petroleum empire helped ignite the Teapot Dome scandal a generation later. On any given afternoon, the air smelled of orange blossoms, eucalyptus, and freshly graded asphalt. Marching north from the trolley line on Santa Monica Boulevard, a visitor met a geologic cross-section of American aspiration. Along Camden Drive, silent screen ingenues in dropped-waist dresses lounged behind trellised rose gardens. Half a mile farther, the streets narrowed into gravel crescents where Oklahoma petroleum men were commissioning storybook Tudors with leaded glass Orioles and wrought iron weather vanes. Delivery trucks arrived every dawn with French bread, parcel post phonographs, and Rolls-Royce carburetor parts. The sidewalks were poured concrete, but the dreams were Portland cement, quick-setting, brittle, and ready to crack. Papa Doheny's apology to his only son, Edward Ned Doheny Jr., for dragging the family name through the Senate bribery hearings was Greystone, a 46,000-square-foot Tudor pile at 905 Loma Vista Drive. At a reported cost of $4 million, about $70 million today, architect Gordon Kaufman installed 55 rooms, 3 Otto Prince boilers the size of locomotives, and a secret concrete tunnel so servants could reach the kitchens unseen. The estate sat on 18.3 acres of terraced gardens, looking south to an orange-glow basin of new film studios. Visitors entered under a porte cochere faced with Indiana limestone the color of storm clouds. The copper scuppers were cast in the shape of dolphins. The library paneling was Polish black oak, salvaged from a 17th-century abbey. The billiard room ceiling bore a carved motto in Latin, Solatium in fortuna variabili, consolation in capricious fortune, commissioned, the architect joked, by a man who had more fortune than consolation. Local gossip claimed the swimming pool tiles were Tiffany glass, but a night watchman corrected reporters. It's not Tiffany. Mr. Doheny imported the tesserae from a glassworks in Murano because he wanted them to match his wife's eyes. Ned, his wife Lucy, and their 5 children moved in on September 30th, 1928. 4.5 months later, on Saturday night, February 16th, 1929, gunfire echoed in the East Wing. Second dramatis personae. Edward Ned Doheny Jr. Mupataindavde. Oil heir, proud UCLA booster. Amateur yachtsman who once tried to sail to Santa Catalina on a bet and wound up in Ensenada. Facing federal conspiracy indictment in a Teapot Dome offshoot, Pocket Diary reveals escalating blackmail payouts to H.P. Lucy Smith Doheny, 32. Ned's wife, St. Louis socialite and former convent school tennis champion. Under strain from gossip, Ned's insomnia, and coded telegrams typed on a private Remington portable. Hugh T.H. Plunkett, Mupataindaude, Ned's boyhood friend, valet, and $500 a month fixer. Knew every ledger entry that tied the Dohenys to Washington. Rumored to carry a Colt new service on cross-country errands. Dr. E.C. Fishball, 55. Doheny family doctor, owned a Hispano-Suiza paid for by consulting fees. Arrived before police, altered the crime scene. Prescription records show a recent rush order for luminol. Leslie T. White, 29. Rookie investigator, L.A. District Attorney's Office. former newsboy turned criminology student at USC. Our detective narrator, skeptical of obvious cases, keeps a Kodak vest pocket tucked in his ankle holster. 3rd Saturday, 16th February, Greystone wakes. Dawn broke camellia pink. Ned Doheny rose at 6, wearing a silk robe monogrammed ELD, paced the library while dictating notes to a dictaphone cylinder, and poured himself a tumbler of fresh orange juice laced with a dash of bourbon. The house kept odd hours. Coal stokers rattled the boiler grates at 5:30. The nursery maid served the children oatmeal at 7. By 8, the telephone switchboard was humming with requests from Papa's attorneys on Bunker Hill. Plunkett arrived at 9:15 a.m. with a sheaf of checks to sign and a hangover he did little to hide. "You ever notice," he muttered while applying sal volatile under his nostrils, "how this town never sleeps, only shifts its nightmares from one mansion to the next?" Ned laughed, slapped his friend's shoulder, but his eyes were rimmed scarlet. By mid-morning, 3 servants would later attest. Mr. Ned looked like a man trying to stand on a fault line. At 11, Lucy hosted a luncheon for the Charity League. Deviled eggs, watercress sandwiches, coffee served in rose-patterned bone china. Beverly Hills still prohibited liquor by ordinance, but in the Greystone butler's pantry stood a mahogany cellaret labelled sarsaparilla. Guests sniffed its cork stoppers and winked. Gossip items that reached Lucy's ears included rumours that United Artists would cast Mary Astor opposite Douglas Fairbanks in an Arabian fantasy, and that Hearst was buying a lion cub for Marion Davies's menagerie. No one mentioned Teapot Dome. Meanwhile, Ned's telephone lines burned. He spoke in low tones to Washington, slammed the receiver, and ordered Plunkett to drive downtown for that briefcase. The valet left in a Pierce Arrow at 12:40 p.m., returned at 3:10, and handed over a calfskin ledger wrapped in butcher paper. Ned locked it in the gunroom safe. According to later stenography, this was the last time anyone but Ned saw the book intact. Dinner was formal, consommé, sole Veronique, roast capon, yet Ned barely touched his plate. At 8:45, he asked Lucy to retire early. "I have to work with Hugh on those invoices." Witnesses differ on whether Lucy kissed his cheek or merely smiled. Plunkett poured 2 inches of scotch into heavy tumblers, fetched a 1/4-inch stack of papers, and followed Ned down the long oak corridor to the guest suite. Midnight was 2 hours away. The first alarm, 10:35 p.m. Lucy later told police she was reading Babbitt in bed when the butler banged on her door. "Butler," whisper urgent. "Mrs. Doheny, Mr. Plunkett is here. Something's wrong." Lucy: "Where's Mr. Doheny?" Butler: "He asked for scotch, ma'am, then locked the guest suite door." A single shot thundered, a concussive clap that rattled picture frames along the upper gallery. Staff scattered. Lucy rushed barefoot down the corridor and smelled burnt cordite mixed with floor wax. Behind the oak door of the guest suite, someone moaned. The door was locked. Lucy, hammering: "Ned, are you hurt?" Muffled groan, indistinct words that the chambermaid later described as sounded like, "For God's sake, Hugh." No reply after that. Lucy ran to the phone and called Dr. Fishbaugh, not the Beverly Hills Police Department. During the 75 minutes it took Fishbaugh to negotiate traffic from Wilshire Boulevard, roadwork had narrowed it to a single lane. The mansion staff gathered in the butler's pantry. 3 maids prayed. Head gardener Felix Ruiz loaded a 12-gauge shotgun with rock salt and stood guard at the service entry. Chamberlain clocks ticked. Nora Bays wafted from the nursery radio, singing "My Man." Fishbaugh sped up Doheny Road and arrived at 11:15 p.m. He and Ned's chauffeur forced the door. Inside lay Ned on a Persian rug, a .45 caliber slug through his left temple. Hugh Plunkett half sat against the Jacobean dresser, the same Colt automatic resting in his right hand, a second wound at his own temple. A half-empty bottle of scotch and 2 tumblers sweated on a side table. White would later write, "The weapon was still hot, as though it had been baked. Vanity Fair. Yet the furnace flues in that wing had been banked hours earlier. Nothing else in the room radiated heat. This detail, small as a spent primer cap, would haunt White more than any bloodstain. No call reached police dispatch until 2:05 a.m., nearly 3 hours after the first shot. 5. Detective White arrives. Greystone's wrought iron gates stood ajar when investigator Leslie T. White arrived with sheriff's deputies at 2:28 a.m. The mansion glowed like a film set. Pathé arc lamps borrowed from Fox Studios illuminated the driveway so photographers could work even before the coroner. Papa Doheny paced the courtyard muttering, "Keep the boy's name clean." White's first impression was olfactory. Cold night jasmine, motor oil, and the faintest trace of discharge drifting on an onshore breeze. He ducked under cables powering the arc lights. B-lights, a grip informed him, 10,000 watts apiece, and noted that the film crew had been summoned faster than the forensic squad. In Los Angeles, even tragedy queued behind publicity. White's notebook records anomalies, gun position. Plunkett's right hand lay palm down. The Colt was under it, but the index finger could not naturally reach the trigger. Powder burns. Ned's wound showed stippling, muzzle within 2 inches. Plunkett's wound showed none. Cigarette stub. A monogrammed Russian melange cigarette smoldered under Plunkett's torso, impossible if he collapsed instantly. Someone had either placed or repositioned the body post-mortem, moved bodies. Fishbaugh confessed he had lifted Ned to hear if breath remained, thereby scrambling lividity patterns. Timeline gaps. Fishbaugh's estimate that shootings occurred at 10:30 conflicted with servant's claim of 2 shots at 10:30 and 10:40. White unzipped his coat. The house thermostat read 64 degrees, yet sweat pricked his collar. Something about the tableau felt rehearsed. He photographed the stiffening bodies, the angle of lamplight on Scotch glasses, the indelible ragged entry wound on Ned's temple that looked less like murder than execution. But the Doheny name was sacrosanct. Sheriff Traeger himself took White aside. Don't dig further than the coroner's verdict. 6. Historical flashback, Teapot Dome's shadow. To untangle motive, White reviews the scandal that still haunts Washington. In 1921, Interior Secretary Albert B. Fall secretly leased the Navy's Teapot Dome Reserve in Wyoming to Sinclair Oil and Elk Hills Reserve in California to Pan American Petroleum, Doheny's firm, in exchange for $404,000 in cash and no-interest loans. Ned personally delivered $100,000 to Fall in a black valise. Hugh Plunkett, always at his side, could place him at the scene. Senate hearings in 1924 led to Fall's imprisonment. Papa Doheny's bribery trial was pending. Spring 1929, with Ned and Hugh on the witness list. Vanity Fair. From Senate transcripts, White learned that Plunkett repeatedly invoked the Fifth Amendment when asked if funds had passed from the younger Mr. Doheny to any public official. Lawyers described Plunkett as a stump too tough to split, but that was before the Great Depression tightened purses. By 1928, Pan American's dividends had shrunk 40%. Hush money was just another operating expense, and Ned was late paying his bills. White paged through back issues of the Los Angeles Examiner. Headlines from 24 to 27 traced a slow-motion collision. Fall indicted, Sinclair jailed, Doheny beats bribery rap. Yet the subheads told a darker story. New grand jury threatens offspring. Ned's offspring was his reputation, and reputations bleed easier than flesh. 7th. Alternative narratives in the Sunday papers. White collects clippings. Los Angeles. Examiner. Doheny heir killed by deranged secretary. Family doctor says shooter had sudden mania. New York Times. Dateline February 17th. Oil fortune seared by tragedy. Authorities see murder-suicide in California. Mansion. Chicago Tribune. Teapot Dome, figure dead, congressional testimony, silenced. But by noon Sunday, the same phrasing, mentally unbalanced, temporary insanity, no mystery remains, appeared in at least 8 wire service reports. It was as if every city desk copied from the same carbon sheet. Reporters on scene were kept 60 feet from the East Wing door. Interviews were filtered through Papa's press agent, Herbert C. Smythe, who handed out a mimeographed statement. Mr. Plunkett was despondent and had asked for rest. Mr. Doheny tried to comfort him. A terrible act ensued before aid could arrive. Privately, 2 journalists tell White the statement was typed before the coroner completed his exam, a tip that would become Exhibit A in White's later memorandum. 8. Forensic detail. Deputy Coroner Frank Nance sketches the bodies. Blood spatter on the drapes behind Ned forms a tight cone, indicating close range. Spatter behind Plunkett is broader, higher on the wall, suggestive of an upward trajectory inconsistent with a self-inflicted shot from a seated angle. Bullet holes in the rug do not align. Ned's lies at 38 inches from the baseboard. Plunkett's at 24. White knelt to examine the Colt M 1911. The slide was forward, chamber empty. The magazine held 5 rounds, 1 short of capacity. He noted faint scorch marks along the barrel, heat more intense than a single cycle would produce. In his lab notebook he wrote, "Posson weapon reheated to erase LV of cold." Contemporary gunsmith manuals warned that wiping prints with alcohol left condensation rings visible under powder. Heating the metal could prevent that. Legal news. White requests paraffin tests for gunpowder residue. Sheriff Traeger denies the order. A waste of county money. The case is obvious. White can only take covert photographs with a vest pocket Kodak. 9. Theories. Take root. By Monday afternoon, the drawing rooms of Beverly Hills hum with speculation. The official story. Plunkett, suffering a nervous breakdown, begged money, was refused, snapped, murdered Ned, then himself. Evidence, doctor's testimony, Plunkett's supposed instability, prompt press release. The reversed guns, Ned shot Plunkett during a quarrel over missing Teapot Dome papers, unpaid loan, panicked and turned the Colt on himself. The family recast him as victim. Evidence, guns odd placement, Ned's powder burns, $10,000 check stub. The third hand. A third person shot both men, staged the crime, and was spirited out via the service tunnel. Candidates whispered a Doheny bodyguard, Lucy, even Papa's Pinkerton chief. Evidence, 2 shots 10 minutes apart, doctor's delay, weapon overheated, footprints in tunnel mud, not yet admitted into record. White files a memo outlining Theory 2. His superior buries it. 10th interlude. Los Angeles at the crossroads. 1929 was a hinge year for the city. The Richfield Building's new electric oil derrick sign pulsed gold against a smog-violet sky, while across Figueroa, radical preacher Amy Semple McPherson preached prosperity. Grauman's Chinese still smelled of wet cement. Warner Brothers scrambled to wire every stage for talkies. The speakeasy in the basement of the subway terminal building served gin fizz to stunt pilots wearing silk scarves. White, commuting from a boarding house near MacArthur Park, felt the civic mood pivot like a dancer about to lose her balance. Exuberant, flush, but one misstep from collapse. If oil was the blood of Los Angeles, he wrote later, then scandal was its heartbeat, each thump a reminder that arteries clog. Los Angeles Review of Books. 11th Episode 1. Cliffhanger. On the 20th of February, the inquest lasts exactly 10 minutes. Verdict, homicide by Hugh Plunkett, who then committed suicide. Case closed. White spoke only once, asked if he wished to suggest alternative interpretations. He replied, "I wish to suggest facts." The coroner banged his gavel. Facts have been entered. That night, White meets Raymond Chandler, a former oil company auditor turned pulp writer at Musso and Frank. He hands Chandler his Kodak proofs. Chandler, studying the slide reset photo. When in doubt, follow the gun. White. I followed it. It doubled back and followed me. Chandler, lighting a Gauloise. Then you've got yourself a story. Just hope the town lets you finish it. Outside on Hollywood Boulevard, a neon sign sputtered, Cinerama. Half its letters were dark. White decided he preferred them that way, more honest. White's diary entry, 23rd February, 1929. Someone wants this buried deeper than Elk Hills, but bullets never lie. Somewhere in a Washington post office, a registered pouch continued its journey, pages inside already sliced away. Greystone slept under new electric security lamps, their filaments humming like distant bees, warning off trespassers or luring them closer. 1. Where we left the case. Greystone's drawing room shooting on the 16th of February 1929 was declared a clear murder-suicide within 48 hours. Every major daily printed the same leitmotif. Valet Hugh Plunkett, racked by nervous collapse, shot oil heir Edward Ned Doheny Jr. and then himself. Yet field investigator Leslie T. White counted at least 9 pieces of physical evidence inconsistent with that narrative. White, now cooling his heels at a bullpen desk overlooking Spring Street, reread his scribbled tally. It felt like a poker hand he could never lay down. 1. A Colt too hot for 2 shots. 2. Powder burns on only 1 corpse. 3. A door that locked itself. 4. Footsteps in the tunnel mud. 5. A doctor who arrived before police. 6. A ledger that evaporated. 7. A check marked loan repayment, dated 48 hours pre-mortem. 8. 2 shots 10 minutes apart. 9. A cigarette stub under a dead man's hip. 9, he muttered to himself, a baseball team of contradictions. Second Monday, 18th February, 1929, the ledger appears. White is ordered back to Greystone for paperwork retrieval only. In the second-floor library, he finds Edna Tucker, the live-in housekeeper, typing an inventory of Ned's personal files for family attorney Frank J. Lynch. She lets slip that Mr. Plunkett had a black calfskin ledger the master never let out of his sight. She is suddenly called away. The ledger vanishes by the time White returns from photographing the file drawers. But the library itself told stories. Dust shadows outlined the absent volume. A rectangle 9 inches high, 6 wide, jammed between Tennyson's Idylls and a mint green 1928 World Almanac. A faint scrape on the shelf's backboard suggested the book had been yanked sideways in haste, tearing a sliver of veneer. White slipped a linen handkerchief from his coat and gingerly dabbed the shelf. Yellow sawdust clung to the cloth, fresh, not oxidized. He pocketed a pinch in a matchbox for later microscopy. A servant coughed at the doorway. White snapped the box shut. At 3:47 p.m., a telegram arrived for Lynch. White glimpsed its Western Union header upside down. H.B. Ledger, arrives 20. Feb stop confirm content stop. By habit, he memorized the routing number, 34 Los 30. He would later discover that 34 Los 30 belonged to a downtown telegraph office favored by oil company couriers who preferred cash desks to check payments. Evening Express, 18th February, 1929. Heir's papers sealed. No further inquiry, says D.A. White notes the date range stamped on empty folders. 1924 to 1926, the years of the $100,000 loan to Interior Secretary Albert Fall. The missing ledger, he suspects, logged repayments to Plunkett for errands to Washington. He paused at the window. Below, gardeners shaped Greystone's cypress hedge into chess-piece topiary. Rook, bishop, king. White wondered which role Hugh Plunkett had played, pawn or knight, and which hand had swept him from the board. 3. Autopsy in chains. Coroner Frank Nance promised a full autopsy. On Tuesday, he hands reporters only a two-page digest. Ned died of a contact wound, left temple to right mastoid. Plunkett of a right temple perforation. Upward path, no powder tattooing. White demands the complete worksheet. Nance shrugs. Ordered sealed by the court. A stenographer outside the coroner's office told White, sotto voce, that the worksheet ran 12 pages, not 2, including a toxicology addendum coded L-7B. She'd retyped it twice because the original bore smudges, like someone had pressed a coffee cup over paragraph 3. White later hears, via a lab technician, that Plunkett's stomach contained 2 grains of barbital, the same sedative prescribed to Ned. The detail never reaches print. The doctor's second story. White re-interviews family physician Dr. Edwin C. Fishbaugh in his office on Wilshire. Fishbaugh's original statement placed his arrival at 11:15 p.m. Now he corrects it to perhaps nearer 11 p.m. When pressed on why he, not police, was summoned first, he offers, Mrs. Doheny feared poor Hugh might still be salvageable. White noticed the physician's hands, manicured, trembling. On the mahogany desk sat a cut-glass decanter labelled Elixir, Pepsin and Soda. The liquid inside was unmistakably Scotch. White asks why a professional would move bodies, altering trajectories. Fishbaugh reddens. Any decent physician checks for life. He ends the interview abruptly. As White reached the door, Fishbaugh called after him, voice tight with both apology and warning. Young man, medicine is the art of easing pain, not amplifying it. 5. Historical interlude, 1929. Los Angeles, oil, vice, and political earthquakes. The Dohenys were hardly the only dynasty under siege. Spring 1929 would soon see Los Angeles Police Chief James Two-Gun Davis appointed to smash a wave of jewel robberies, while the county grand jury eyed Sheriff William Traeger's gambling take. Newly incorporated Beverly Hills still had no homicide squad, relying instead on county deputies whose budget was sweetened by donations from the same millionaires they might one day have to investigate. The newspapers joked that graft traveled Wilshire like a streetcar. 10 cents to climb aboard, $10 to stay seated. Behind cigar smoke partitions, oil lobbyists met vice captains to plan spot raids on rival bootleggers. Movie moguls financed slush funds to keep starlet arrests off the blotter, and judges rode to work in sedans provided by the same bail bondsmen they pretended not to know. In this ecosystem, truth was a migratory species, protected in theory, hunted in practice. 6. The Servants' Night. White tracks down Alonzo Garfias, assistant chauffeur, at the Plaza Church on Olvera Street where he attends early mass. Over tamales, he recounts. At approximately 10:30 p.m., he heard a first shot while checking tire pressures in the motor court. 10 to 12 minutes later, a second report rang louder. Like the door had come open. Garfias swears Lucy was already in the corridor after the first shot, contradicting her claim that she heard only one. He refuses to sign a statement. The Senora was always generous. Garfias's hands shook as he spooned red salsa. Senor White, you think I want to testify? They'll say I was drunk or stealing spark plugs. But I saw Mrs. Lucy run across the balcony, hair down, screaming, "Why won't it open?" That was after the first bang, not the second. White bought him another tamale. Garfias leaned closer. And there was a third man that night. High-collar coat, Homburg hat. Not one of ours. I saw him on the garden path when the second shot sounded. He vanished toward the tunnel. 6.1 Timeline. Servants' version versus official. Clock time servants hearing official narrative. 10:30 p.m. Shot number 1. Argument in guest suite. 10:40 to 42 p.m. Raised voices. Lucy in hall. No record. 10:42 to 45 p.m. Shot number 2. Plunkett kills self instantly. 11 p.m. Fishbaugh arrives. 11:15 p.m. Reverends, 11 o'clock. 2:05 a.m. Police finally called. 2:05 a.m. Two shots spaced apart. Buttress Theory 3. Third-party intervention, or at minimum a staged scene after Ned's death. 7. Tracking the Black Ledger. On Thursday, White recruits Postal Inspector Paul Berendt to trace any special delivery envelopes between Greystone and Washington in the fortnight before the shooting. Berendt returns a single match. 13th February, registered pouch Beverly Hills to Union Station to D.C., addressee H.T. Baldwin, Occidental Hotel, the alias Plunkett used in Senate testimony reservations. The pouch weighed 2 pounds 4 ounces, the heft of a calfskin ledger. Berendt added a wrinkle. Someone at Union Station's Railway Mail Terminal had flagged the pouch for late-night transfer via American Rail Express, an expedited service costing triple the usual fee and payable only in cash. 8. A new motive emerges. White's hypothesis. After the Teapot Dome bribery acquittal in 1926, Ned continued paying Plunkett hush money. By 1929, Papa Doheny's criminal trial for conspiracy to defraud the government was calendared for March. Fresh subpoenas loomed. Ned, desperate to keep Hugh loyal, promised but failed to settle outstanding debts. On the 13th, Hugh mailed incriminating books east as insurance. 3 nights later, he confronted Ned for final payment. But White suspected another ingredient in the cocktail: loyalty curdled into affection. A valet knows which side a man parts his hair, how he folds his shame, he wrote. Affection weaponized becomes leverage. 9. Ballistics ghosts. County criminologist Ray Pinker privately examines White's photographs. See that oval burn on Mr. Doheny's temple? That's contact, maybe the muzzle pressed through hair. Plunkett's wound edge is clean, pale, gun at least a foot away. Blood pooling under both is uneven. Ned bled later, not first. Pinker's speculation. Ned, alive after the first shot, crawled or was dragged, then shot at closer range, inconsistent with the family's heroic tableau. White asked, could a man reset the slide after shooting himself? Pinker snorted. Maybe Houdini. Dead fingers don't rack steel. 10th Friday headlines. DA closes the file. Los Angeles Times, 22 de febrero de 1929. District Attorney clears Doheny death. Plunkett acted alone. At 3 p.m., White is ordered to transfer to the Vice Squad, effective Monday. He cleaned out his desk, an ink blotter, half-used lead pencils, a dog-eared handbook on serology, and left behind a single item, a scrap of napkin on which he wrote, "Truth lives in exhumed bullets." 11th weekend at Lake Arrowhead. Lucy retreats with the children to the Doheny's mountain lodge. White drives up the rim of the World Highway, posing as a time stringer, and secures 10 minutes on the dock. Pine needles crackled underfoot. Lake water slapped pilings. The sky was cobalt, pierced by white gulls. Lucy wore a dove-grey cardigan that made her eyes appear almost silver. Key points from her guarded conversation. She concedes hearing a shot, a silence, then Hugh shouting, "You've ruined me!" Ned answered, "Put that thing down, for God's sake." She claims she fled before the second shot, but did not lock the guest suite door, contradicting Fishbore's statement that he had to break it open. White pressed gently. "Mrs. Doheny, did Hugh ever threaten you?" She stared at the lake. "Hugh threatened history," she said at last. "Some men would kill to protect their past. Others—" She let the sentence drown in ripples. 12th L.A.'s rumor mill. Behind speakeasy curtains, a different gossip churns, that Ned and Hugh's bond was more than brotherly. The two men took extended hunting trips alone in Canada. Lucy tolerated the arrangement. No newspaper dares print the implication. but in a 1931 grand jury memo, White later obtains under seal the phrase sexual leverage appears next to Plunkett's name. White was no moralist, but he understood leverage. In a city where morals were rented by the hour, secrets cost compound interest. 13. A sudden break. The apothecary. White finds that Seaver's pharmacy in Beverly Hills filled Plunkett's barbital prescription at Ned's behest 3 days before the shooting. The label read, "Take one at bedtime." 4 capsules were dispensed, only one found in Plunkett's stomach. Where are the other 3? The pharmacist, a rheumy-eyed widower named Seaver, thumbed his ledger. Mr. Plunkett paid cash, crisp 5s. Odd thing, he asked whether luminal shows in coffee. Seaver's duplicate receipt went to Papa Doheny's estate office, not Hugh. White copies the ledger entry by hand while the clerk flirts with a studio starlet. 14. The smoking check. Remembering Edna's comment, White combs Plunkett's apartment. In a sock drawer he finds a check stub, Bank of Italy, number 1484, dated February 14, 1929. $10,000 loan repayment drawn on E.L. Doheny Jr. The cancelled check never surfaces in probate. 10,000 equals exactly 1 year of Plunkett's hush allowance. White folded the stub into his notebook. Funny, he thought, how IOUs become epitaphs. 15th Historical Sidebar. Buren Fitz and the Vanishing Prosecutions. Fitz, elected January 1929 on a clean house platform, would within 2 months drop inquiries into Greystone, the silent Rowan bootlegging murders, and a police graft probe, cases overlapping Los Angeles's most moneyed families. By 1934, a federal grand jury would indict him for bribery. He beat the rap twice, but lost re-election. His nickname in the press corps was Fitz by a hair, for he always escaped accountability by hairbreadth mistrials. 16. Newspaper montage. Burying the story. White counted column inches. On launch day, Lindbergh merited 120. On verdict day, the Doheny shooting drew 96. By March, it shrank to a 2-line squib under telegrams received. Even scandal has a half-life when money irradiates the newsstand. 17th. Episode 2. Reckoning. 3 working theories revisited. White circled Scenario 3 on his memo, added 1 word, probable. 18. Cliffhanger. A telegram from Washington. On 4 March 1929, Senator Walsh's office wires White. Have received package marked HB Occidental. Contents missing. Stop trace at once. Stop. White read it twice, then burned it over a trash can behind the Hall of Justice. Ash spiraled skyward like grey snow. He whispered, "Ledger's gone, but bullets keep copies." That night, an anonymous caller warns his boarding house landlady, "Tell your snoop to mind county business, or he'll be sleeping in grease like them others." White loads his Colt vest pocket and begins drafting a private chronicle, the document Raymond Chandler will later mine for the big sleep. He titles the first page, "Greystone, a Study in Pressure." 1st March 1929. No further questions. 10 days after the coroner's jury pronounced Hugh Plunkett a madman and Ned Doheny his victim, field investigator Leslie T. White found himself reassigned to vice detail and stripped of a badge. The official line, "Murder-suicide committed in a fit of mania," was now printed in every city editor's style book. White spent his first Monday on Vice, tailing a brothel madam in Boyle Heights. The assignment felt punitive, a sandbag tied to curiosity. During the stakeout, he rewound the Greystone clock in his head. What if the heated Colt, the delayed calls, the missing ledger were not loose threads but a single rope? A rope, he wrote in his notebook margin, strong enough to strangle inquiry. On March 28th, he lunched with Raymond Chandler at Clifton's cafeteria. Chandler slid across a typescript, a 20-page crime short titled Oil for the Lamps of Murder. Characters bore aliases, Doheny, Valet Puckett, but the plot tracked Greystone point for point. Fiction is the only courthouse where evidence isn't suppressed, Chandler quipped. White pocketed the pages, sensing that his investigation had migrated to literature, safe from subpoenas yet alive. 2. 1929 to 1931, the Grey Years. While America slid from jazz-age exuberance into depression, the case at Greystone gathered dust. April 1929. White was quietly dismissed for cause. Raymond Chandler typed up White's field notes for posterity. December 1929. The Dohenys endowed $1 million to St. Vincent's Catholic Church. Newspaper society columns praised their charity, never mentioning the East Wing bloodstains. January 1930. Interior Secretary turned felon Albert Fall began his one-year sentence in the New Mexico State Penitentiary. Papa Doheny's own conspiracy retrial loomed. December 1930. A Washington jury again acquitted Edward L. Doheny of bribery, reasoning that the $100,000 valise delivered by Ned was a loan among friends. White's own fortunes dimmed. He worked 6 months for the Western costume rental warehouse, cataloging Colt replicas for cowboy cereals. Nights he nursed nickel coffees at the King Edward Hotel bar, annotating court transcripts in tiny script. History, he mused to the bartender, is a ledger with missing pages. You can still balance it if you know what numbers were too dangerous to write down. October 1930, a break. White answered a want ad for a research clerk with shorthand at the new Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. The reform-minded incoming supervisor, John Anson Ford, liked White's gumption and hired him at $1,800 a year. White moved into a room over a San Pedro fish market, cheap rent, constant breeze, the sea masking diesel fumes. 3. 1931. A sliver of light. A chance opening arrived through bureaucracy. Coroner Frank A. Nance prepared his 1931 annual report. Tucked into the statistical appendix was an unredacted line item. Case number 1929-1756, Doheny/Plunkett. Dual gunshot wounds. Dispute, Ray, powder stippling unresolved. By law, coroner reports were public records after 2 years. White obtained a photostat. He marched straight to Supervisor Ford. Sir, the file was never finished. Evidence contradicts the verdict. Ford, who loved nothing more than a David versus Goliath headline, stroked his pipe and asked, "Can we reopen an inquest without spooking every donor on Wilshire?" White answered, "We need no limelight, only subpoena power and a basement." Ford grinned. "Basement I can provide. Power you'll have to borrow from courage." Thus, the confidential re-inquest convened in a Hall of Records sub-basement on 17 August 1931. No press, no spectators, one bailiff bored enough to chew his moustache. Fourth re-interview, the chauffeur's confession. First witness, Alonzo Garfias, assistant chauffeur, now a WPA road worker. Under oath, he repeated that he heard 2 shots roughly 10 minutes apart, not the single bang-bang of a murder-suicide. White displayed a blown-up photograph of boot prints in tunnel mud, prints he'd secretly developed in his boarding house sink 2 years earlier. Garfias identified the tread, company guard boots. They issue them at the refinery. See that crosshatch inside the heel? Only the refinery has that mold. Garfias further swore that after the first report, he glimpsed a tall man in an overcoat hurry toward the servants' tunnel. "He carried something wrapped in cloth," Garfias said, fingers trembling. "Could have been a jacket, could have been a gun. I just remember the cloth was white, hospital white." Under cross-examination by an attorney hired by the Doheny estate, Garfius admitted he had been paid $600 severance to find work elsewhere 3 days after the funeral. White asked, "Was that normal?" Garfius answered, "Normal as a snowstorm in June." 5. The Money Trail, Panama and back. Chandler's carbon of Plunkett's missing ledger contained a few legible entries, check numbers with PAWPCO notations. Microfilm vouchers showed monthly $850 payments to H.T. Baldwin, routed through Banco Ismeño, Panama City. The remittances stopped January 1929. White located an out-of-print Dun & Bradstreet listing. Banco Ismeño's biggest Los Angeles correspondent was Security First National, whose largest depositor, records showed, was Pan American Western Petroleum. Money had boomeranged through the canal zone, laundering itself in humidity before sailing home. A sudden cut-off of hush money weeks before the shooting jibed with the theory that the valet had arrived that night to demand arrears. One subpoena later, a Security First cashier produced wire stubs with cryptic memos. "Stop HB drip immediately. Risk unsat." The date, 22nd January 1929. 6. The suppressed toxicology. The 1931 file included the full toxicology sheet, barbital in Plunkett, 2 grains, none in Ned. Fishbore's narrative that both men drank scotch together was therefore suspect. White questioned Dr. Harold Reeves, the county chemist who had tested the stomach contents. Reeves testified that Fishbore himself delivered the samples, already decanted into unlabeled jars. "Chain of custody?" White asked. "Broken," Reeves admitted. The jurors shifted uneasily. Fishbore refused a second subpoena, citing ruptured health. He would die of heart failure in 1934, never cross-examined. 7th Reassembly of the Colt. County criminologist Ray Pinker reconstructed the weapon using firing pin impressions preserved in wax. He demonstrated for jurors that if Plunkett had fired last, his death grip would have frozen the slide back, ejecting the spent casing. Yet crime scene photos showed the slide forward and locked, an action consistent with a deliberate reset by a third hand. Pinker then unveiled a surprise. Metallurgical assays revealed microscopic scoring on the barrel exterior, consistent with brief immersion in boiling liquid, possibly to raise overall temperature. The slide photographs were passed around. A juror whispered, "Someone cooked the gun." Pinker's conclusion, sequence more consistent with external staging than with organic murder-suicide. 8. The 3 possible endings. Scenario sequence of shots, prime mover, supporting evidence weaknesses. I. Plunkett in mania. Plunkett shoots Ned. Suicides seconds later. Acute psychosis. Early press statements. Doctor affidavit. No powder on Plunkett, slide reset, hush money motive ignored. Second, ledger confrontation. Ned shoots Plunkett, stages scene, self-inflicts. Ned panicked. Contact wound, $10,000 check, hush cutoff. Requires extensive staging while wounded. Third, professional silence. Hired guard drugs. Plunkett kills Ned, finishes Plunkett. Corporate fixer. 2-shot interval. Tunnel prints. Missing ledger. Circumstantial. Hitman unidentified. White added margin notes. To I, psychosis improbable. To 2, timing. Door lock still thorny. To 3, boots plus boiled gun. Choreography. 9. Weighing the cases. White's 1931 weightings. Scenario 1, 15%. Scenario 2, 35%. Scenario 3, 50%. After the basement hearing adjourned each night, White sat alone beneath a buzzing Edison bulb, building a scale model timeline with colored yarn on a corkboard. Red for documented events, blue for conjecture, green for suppressed facts. By week's end, the board resembled a spider web, its fattest strand a green line running from the refinery bootprints to the boiled barrel colt. "Follow heat," he whispered. "Heat equals hands-on." One juror, a retired haberdasher, asked privately, "Mr. White, if the verdict is no conclusion, does the truth still exist?" White answered, "Like a safe at the bottom of the sea. It exists, but few will pay salvage." 10th. Aftermath. September 1935. Papa Doheny died of heart disease. Within weeks, White anonymously published The Greystone Problem in True Detective Mysteries, coded just enough to dodge libel. 1936. White's memoir, Me, Detective Hit Bookstores. Chapter 7 reproduced much of the suppressed autopsy, catalyzing Chandler's plotting. 1965. The city of Beverly Hills, fearing subdivision, bought Greystone for $1.3 million. The estate opened as a public park in 1971. 2002 to present. The site hosts the immersive play, The Manor, a thinly veiled retelling of the case. White never grew rich. He lectured occasionally at USC, drove a second-hand Hudson, and kept every royalty check inside the battered matchbox that once held shelf sawdust. In 1959, he revisited the manor incognito during a film shoot. A prop master handed him a replica, M1911 boiled for patina. White shuddered and left without watching the scene. 11th Epilogue. A Walk Through the Gardens, July 2025. If you stand today on the flagstone terrace above the reflecting pool, Beverly Hills below shimmers with Teslas where Pierce arrows once idled. Tour guides recite the murder-suicide, but a generation raised on podcasts stops to ask, why was the slide forward? Why 2 shots? Why the empty ledger? Near the balustrade grows a cypress trimmed into a rook. Few notice the plaque at its base. In memory of Alonzo Garfias, faithful employee. The city installed it in 2011 after historians pointed out he never appeared in any Doheny memoir. Garfias died in 1968, leaving a diary whose last entry read, "Truth is heavier than lead. I carried it 40 years." The diary vanished in probate. History, like oil, seeps. Documents surface, reputations oxidize, and the improbable becomes inevitable. Yet Greystone keeps its secret in oak-paneled hush. Leslie T. White died in 1967. His ashes, per request, were scattered in the hills within earshot of the shots. Chandler, asked late in life whether he knew the truth, merely sipped gimlet and said, "I know a good story when a city hands me one." 3 graves remain: Ned at Calvary Cemetery, Hugh in Holy Cross, and the reputation of Edward L. Doheny in the court of public doubt. Until a surviving page of that black ledger appears, the mansion atop Loma Vista will echo with alternate endings, each plausible, none provable. On calm evenings, the cypress rook casts a long shadow toward the guest suite windows. Some visitors swear the silhouette looks less like a chess piece and more like a man in an overcoat, striding tunnel-ward, forever carrying a cloth-wrapped secret.